Little bit of an intro. I'm Frederick Starkey. Took the key from my partner's surname. There's a joke there, but I don't much care to repeat it. I consider myself a bit of an investigator, along with my duties as a curio collector. As the sole proprietor of the admittedly humble Starkey Curiosity Shop around Midtown Jackson, Wyoming, I come into your typical junk. Someone tries to see how much they can get for a glass eye molded from what is obviously plastic. Someone claims their grandma's spirit lives on in a thick, leather-bound book. Or most often, I get a shipment of cursed daggers with blades flimsier than spatulas that you can get at the Dollar Tree. The point is that I've acquired several sorts of peculiarities, enough to decorate the charcoal walls of my shop. I've even got some lawn gnomes scattered around. Supposedly, they create a protective aura. I suppose that's a good thing, considering my wares qualities. For all of you, I'd love to share my most interesting experience so far. It was a while ago, but I hope you'll forgive me for the delay. I sincerely wish that the gnomes were the most hair-raising thing about my occupation, but unfortunately, this side of Wyoming is home to some pretty interesting folk. It was a winter day, the 14th of January. I wish I could say that it was the day's events that inscribed the exact date in my mind, but in reality, I had the closest cafe to blame. They overcharged me for a cup of hot chocolate, and reading the receipt was the most annoyed I'd been in quite a while. The date, of course, was right at the top of the paper slip. As I nursed my lukewarm drink, I took some time to look around my shop. I set to work on tidying things up, though I thought that the level of dustiness really added to the place's overall vibe. Still, a half hour passed and the shop was half clean before I heard the high trinkle of the doorbell. I turned to the entrance and spotted a young man wearing a beanie and 3 layers of all blue clothing. He held a plastic bag in both of his hands, and he seemed to teeter from side to side with its weight. There's a strange prickle that comes to my neck whenever I sense that my day is about to get genuinely interesting. Beyond the typical definition of interesting, which is typically something like a father's careless response to an 8-year-old's newest drawing. Needless to say, I felt it as the man approached my counter and hoisted his bag up atop the wooden surface. I remember my childish thought at the crimson tip of his nose. Rudolph, I wanted to call him. He tucked a ginger lock back into his beanie, and he pushed his gloved hands deep into the bag. Right, sorry. Those were his first words to me. I should have taken it out. No rush. I remember mumbling as I kicked one of my gnomes aside. I had since decided that they were not for sale. The man unfurled the bag and revealed a steely box with a pattern of ridges. It was padlocked twice, and a golden key was taped to its top. I will transcribe what I remember of what he said, while trying to fill in the blanks from my own current assumptions. His statement was as follows. I know it looks like a lot, but I was trying to get it here safely. It's a watch. An ornate watch with some crystals in it. I've had them looked at. They're not just rhinestones. Listen to me, Mr. Starkey. At this point, his hands were on top of the box. He met my eyes. I can perfectly recall his next words. The time shown on this watch is never wrong. It will never lie. All it will do is play. It was at this point that I simply thanked him for his contribution and asked him to add his name to a list I kept on a clipboard. Lucas Clishern, his signature read. I'm looking at that very list as I type this out. I did not question his words, as my confirmation of the more intriguing item's abilities has nothing to do with another person's testimony. No, I give it a try for myself. I entirely accept the fact that I'm an idiot. I wish Mr. Clishern a good day and gave him a sum of $25 for his contribution to my shop. I promised to add more to the deal if it proved a worthwhile addition to my more permanent collection, which sat behind a glass pane at the back of my workspace. As he left, I peeled the tape off the box and twisted the key in both of the padlocks. They both clattered to the counter, and I unclamped the box. I pulled it open, feeling reminded of the briefcase from Pulp Fiction. A layer of white styrofoam protected a cloth-wrapped device. I pulled the cloth away and saw that Mr. Clishern's description had been an accurate one. In front of me, there sat a gold-strapped wristwatch. Red and blue studs were along the band, and as I pulled it out with ginger care, I could tell that a layer of quartz separated me from the watch's ticking hands. It was accurate to the second. If it wasn't so seemingly cursed, it could have been worth an incredible amount. It was a great improvement to the Power Rangers watch I'd owned since I was 11 years old. I pulled my sleeve back and donned the watch, admiring its detail for most of my uneventful shift. A few customers came in to browse and left without buying anything, which was customary. Sensible people still exist, I suppose. Anyway, I closed up and made my way back home. I felt the same hunger that greeted me at the end of my shift. Without a watch, I'd usually use my stomach's grumble as a clock chime to tell me it was time to get home. I dined well that night. My partner had made shepherd's pie. I slept. I woke. My watch told me the time, still accurate to my phone. If I may summarize, my life went along as usual for 3 days. I had taken to cross-referencing the watch with my phone by the second. The 18th of January came along, and my watch was about a half hour slow. That was also the morning when I realized that there were no knobs or buttons on the watch. The watch was 30 minutes off, and that was a simple fact. Nevertheless, it was about time to open up my shop. I drove over and did the deed, after getting a latte from a more trustworthy cafe. I stepped inside, flipped the closed sign around to an open one, and took my place behind the counter. I spent the first few minutes of the day dusting the gnome that stood by my side. I was bored, and he was looking more unsightly than usual. 2 people bought daggers that day. One of them told me that she sensed its aura. Well, you can sense all you want, as long as you're buying. An older man gave me a chipped teapot that had apparently survived since the 20s. Once owned by a family who were killed in their dining room by a meteor strike. Nasty way to go. I gave him 30 for it. His story honestly won me over. It was a local tale, and I intended to do more research on it. I knew that the library carried newspapers from every year of the town's past. I didn't check my watch, but my stomach grumbled, and I knew what that meant. I figured that I would stop by at home before I went to research the meteor strike. As I arrived, my partner, I neglected to say, Danny, piqued my interest with a question. Apparently, I was nearly 2 hours late. I simply said that I had lost track of time, which was not entirely false. It was an interesting thought. As we ate, the questions pestered my mind. If my watch was 30 minutes slow, how could I have been 2 hours late? Moreover, my hunger was downright Pavlovian, so it was beyond me as to how it possibly could have failed me. I punished it with an extra helping of dessert and went off to the library, which was, predictably, closed as soon as I arrived. I considered removing the watch when I went to bed that night, but I felt that it would have been a massive impedance to my research on its supposed curse. So far, it mainly seemed like some screwy machinery. In the next few days, its slowness was increased at 5-minute intervals. I came back home later and later, but decided that the cutoff time was sundown, hunger pangs or not. I could eat without being in starvation mode, so it was more of a nuisance than a genuine problem. I got home, I ate, I went to bed, as was my increasingly unscheduled routine. That morning was when the watch began to speed up. I turned my morning drink into a takeout breakfast, and I stood behind the counter with a latte and a croissant sandwich with a side of hash browns. It did well to satiate the throbs of hunger and thirst that clawed at my stomach, my throat. I made sure to discard my waste before any customers arrived. Eating while on the job is uncouth, which is annoying. It's my shop. I should be allowed to make my own rules. The day ended when my phone said so. Damn the watch. I didn't expect Danny to pick me up that day. Well, to be frank, I also didn't expect to swerve into a ditch because of a sudden spell of sleep while driving home. A raw, animal hunger beat at my ribcage as Danny carried me to the front door, and I made my way to the fridge before I even explained anything to him. I shoveled shredded mozzarella into my stomach, barely aware of how disgusting the sight would have been. My eyes were lidded. Every motion felt like my joints were attached to 50-pound dumbbells. I staggered and fell against the counter before Danny could finally get my attention. He asked me what on earth was going on. Like an idiot, I claimed that I didn't know. like an idiot. When he carried me off to bed, I told him I'd be fine to work tomorrow. The next day, felt like every fifth blink gave me a minute or two of sound sleep. I sat at the counter with a huge bag of trail mix and a gallon jug of water. I drained the entire jug when I was halfway through my shift, and I felt this tingle, this tightness around my hands. Every time I looked down to see what it was about, my body slumped and I slept. My tongue turned to taffy, and my lips were crusted as I shoveled trail mix into my mouth. I was blessed with very few customers that day. Very few people to look at my sunken countenance and recoil. I yawned at closing time and got up to change the sign to closed. As I was 5 steps away from the door, my legs gave out. I woke up with a bloody nose, sprawled out in the back of Danny's car. A rolled tissue was stuffed into one of my nostrils. I reached up to brush the sweat from my brow. The back of my hand was leather. I struggled to clasp my fingers, to bring my hand into my view. I squinted and looked over the bumpy, taut skin. My veins were thick tubes that nearly tore through ghostly flesh. My knuckles turned to awful, knobby things. I inhaled and braced myself to scream, but I only slept. I woke up when we reached the driveway, and my chest tightened at the sound of Danny's sobs, muffled by his sleeve. I thought he would have been used to this part of my work. I tried to speak his name through my sandpaper throat, but all that came out was a raspy breath. My fingers trembled so violently as I reached for my wrist. I touched the quartz shield of the watch, and I fell back asleep. I forced my eyes back open, and I dangled in Danny's arms. I squinted up at him and parted my lips. Again, no luck. I reached to my wrist with more force and pinched the watch's strap. With a wheezing grunt, I undid it. I caught the watch and, with unsure fingers, stuffed it into Danny's jacket pocket. I sat up on the sofa and smacked my scaly lips together. A glass of water sat on the coffee table. I reached out with my weathered fingers and downed it. My tongue stung at the departure from the pure desert dryness. I set the glass down with a sense of finality and stood, my knees wobbly. I called for Danny and asked if he kept the watch. He had. Good, I said. My body had seen the effects of countless curses. My back's flayed skin would tell you as much, as would the ridiculous number of hospital visits I've avoided by marrying a surgeon. At the end of it all, it just so happened that the watch would be worth keeping around. I gave Mr. Lucas Clichern an extra $30 for his excellent contribution.
Number 1. Catwalk. I had a really weird experience with a cat one time. Looking back on it, it is just one of those things that I have a hard time explaining. I tend to walk just about everywhere. I have a car, but for health reasons, I think it is important for me to go out and get some exercise. I live only a small ways out of town, and in a relatively safe area, so I will take walks during the day, during the night, whatever. On this particular night, I was not feeling tired at all. I was up late and I heard a notification on my cell phone. My direct deposit had gone through for my paycheck. I decided to go ahead and go to the store. I had been broke for a few days and eating nothing but ramen. So I got up and headed out for the store. Now, I hadn't gone very far when I noticed a kitten across the street from me. The very moment the kitten saw me, it came prancing over to me. This is not the first time I had something like this happen to me. The kitten brought a smile to my face because it had this spunky energy about it. Its tail stuck straight up and it ran over to me. As I walked along, the little cat did its best to keep up with me. It's always funny to think about those 4 little legs moving so fast in an attempt to keep pace with me. Normally when a similar thing happens, the cat following me does not do it for very long. I might get down the street with my companion before something new catches its eye and it goes off. But this time the kitten kept following me. I actually began to worry because even though it was nighttime, I have to cross a highway in order to get where I was going. If the kitten decided to leave me near the highway, then I would have to be worried about it getting hit by a car. I tried several things to get the kitten to quit following me. I tried to distract it. I tried to throw something and see if it would chase it. When all else failed, although it broke my heart to do it, I tried yelling at it. I figured if I was mean to it, it would run off. I would feel bad about it, but at least it might keep him away from the highway and alive. However, not even yelling at the kitten seemed to work. The poor little thing was determined that it was not going to leave me, no matter what. So the kitten stuck with me all the way down to the store. I opened the door and went in, convinced that when I was done shopping, the kitten would finally move on to someone or something else. However, I was proven wrong when I came out of the store and noticed it sitting right by the door. It was like the cat was waiting for me. I was amused, but also in a way relieved. If the kitten would follow me all the way back home, I could give it some food, and I would also know that it would be safe away from the highway. Just like before, the kitten just followed me again. I went all the way from the store, down the highway, across the highway, and right back into my neighborhood. The whole time, the kitten stayed with me. As before, its tail sticking straight up in the air, and those 4 tiny legs moving as fast as they could. When I got home, I was about to go inside. The kitten began meowing at me. I wasn't sure what for. I tried to let it know that I would only be a moment. I was going to go grab it some tuna for sticking with me through the entire walk. Also because I thought that by feeding it, the kitten would remain by me and not go back to the highway. But the kitten seemed distressed, something that I hadn't noticed before. For the first time since I had seen it, I reached down to pick up the kitten. While I was petting it, suddenly, my living room light turned on. I froze and almost dropped the kitten. I lived alone. There was no reason my living room light should turn on. Someone had to have broken into my house. Taking the kitten, I ran to the side of the house. I pulled out my cell phone and I called the police. Then I remained by the house until the police showed up. Some person I did not know ran out the back door of the house. The police, however, quickly picked him up. The guy had prior assault and breaking and entering charges. It was weird. I cannot imagine that the little kitten had any idea someone was in my home. But if it had not gotten distressed, I would have gone into my house, and most likely would have been attacked. Also, had the kitten not stuck with me the entire time, its distressed meow wouldn't have bothered me so much. Well, needless to tell you, I decided to adopt the kitten as my own. I named him Lion, because he protected me from getting hurt, and I can only imagine a lion being the sort of cat that could do that. Number 2. Gifts. Like many Killer Orange Cat fans, I love cats. Not only do I have 4 of my own, but I tend to feed the neighborhood cats as well. So it wasn't much of a surprise when I started finding parts of dead animals on my porch. It started with the back half of a lizard. I found it when leaving for work in the morning, and while there was initially shock at seeing this half lizard on my porch, I knew right away that one of my feline friends had left it as a gift. I removed a tissue from my purse and picked it up by the tail, hoping my feline friends didn't see me as I deposited it in the garbage can before getting into my car and searching for the Purell. I didn't really think much of it, and I found nothing else on the porch for another week. Then one morning I woke to find a dead mouse. Thankfully, it wasn't like the lizard, and in fact, I didn't even see that it was bloody. Into the garbage can it went, and I was off to work without another thought. Cats are predators, and when they're left outside like the ones in my neighborhood, they're gonna kill things, and sometimes they give them to their humans. It's like they think we're bad at hunting and they're trying to help. It's both sweet and grisly. So other than being curious as to which cat was leaving me gifts, I didn't really give it much thought at all. Over the next week I was gifted with the other half of a lizard, a mole, and sadly a baby bird. I was beginning to dread opening my door every morning. The little animals made me sad, and I was starting to wish the cat would finish his meals. I even began thinking maybe I should leave less food out, so the cats would be hungry enough to eat their kills. It was around the time that I was thinking this, when I opened my door to find a dead bird. That wasn't like the others. To my horror, its head was crushed. I had began leaving the house with tissues ready, and I quickly shredded this bird in them, and dumped it in the garbage. The image was burned into my eyes, and I spent my ride to work wondering if a cat could do that to a bird. I convinced myself that bird bones were just really fragile, and cats have strong jaws, so there was nothing strange about this bird. Not 2 days later, I was greeted with the most disgusting gift yet, a chipmunk with its belly torn open. I even had to pick up some insides off the porch. I threw up after throwing this one out, and by the time I got home from work, I had decided to stop feeding the neighborhood cats. I felt really guilty about it, but I knew that most of the cats had homes and were just getting fed regularly anyways. They were just coming to me for something extra. Obviously, whatever cat was leaving gifts was perfectly capable of getting his own food, and I simply could not deal with any more dead animals on my porch. At first, it seemed to work. I went 2 weeks without a gift, and then one morning I opened the door to the truth. This wasn't a cat. This had never been a cat. I knew this because a cat could never have done what I found on my porch. It was a squirrel. A dead squirrel. I knew this because the tail had been left intact. That cute, fluffy tail. Had it not been for that, I wouldn't have known what this strange lump of meat was, because there was no hint of fur or skin left on the animal. It hadn't been chewed on. It hadn't been gutted. It was just skinned, and the skin was gone. I shut the door and called the police. I told them about all the animals and having assumed it was a cat. They confirmed it was definitely no animal that left the squirrel. I don't know if the person doing this saw the police, or if the squirrel was intended as their final message, but it's been 6 weeks, and I've not opened my door to another gift. Thinking back over the different animals that had been on my porch, and the state of their poor little bodies, I just can't understand what kind of human being could not only do this, but then leave it on someone's porch, intending to freak them out. Just why? Why? Number 3. Intruder. I have a black cat that I love to death. She has been getting on in the years, but she still has a little bit of pep in her step when she needs it. Black cats get a pretty bad rap in the world. I mean, everyone knows that a black cat crossing your path is a superstition that you'll have bad luck. Hell, even here in Chicago, people blame the collapse of the Chicago Cubs one season on a black cat walking across Wrigley Field. But black cats actually get a lot of hate from other people, and that sometimes includes people who own cats. They have a reputation for being evil, being devils, and this causes a lot of black cats to end up homeless, and it's pretty sad. I, on the other hand, adore black cats. I have had a few throughout my life. When my current black cat, Whitey, and yes, I gave her an ironic name, goes up to cat heaven, I will most likely get myself another black cat. But my scary story does involve my cat. But I had to get all that evil nonsense out of the way before mentioning it, though. She does have one scary feature that all black cats do happen to have, though. They disappear better in the dark than any other cats can do. I don't really have a lead-in for this story other than that. I do have some motion detection cameras in my house, though. I had a break-in years ago, and ever since then, I needed some security measures in my house. I did have an alarm, but it had developed problems over the years, and I never set it when I was in the house. I was sleeping, and suddenly I was woken by two noises happening at the same time. The first was the unmistakable sound of my cat Whitey, screeching like a freaking banshee. The second was the sound of a human being, in super obvious pain. I immediately knew that someone must have broken into my house. I live alone, so I should never hear a person in my house in the middle of the night. I grabbed my phone and immediately called the police. Well, the police got there, and the intruder had already left, but they caught up to him pretty quickly. Whitey was in the house, and she had a small limp, though fortunately none of her bones were broken. So what happened? Well, the security camera revealed that. A man broke into my home. He wasn't using a flashlight, just relying on his own vision, and I had seen him in several rooms, and he was in my living room. There was a jewelry box next to the chair that I always sit in. The man walked over to the chair and reached for the box, seemingly appearing out of thin air, but really just shaded by the darkness around the chair. Whitey jumped out of my chair with a vicious scream. It was hard to tell, but we realized when the man was arrested that Whitey had bit right into the flesh between the man's thumb and index finger, and she bit all the way through. The man had to shake the hell out of his hand over and over to finally get Whitey off him. She hit the wall, which is how she got hurt. But she also immediately got back up, and that is when the man fled the house. Whitey healed up just fine, and the intruder spent about 3 months in jail. I don't expect he will ever come back. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. You know how occasionally I will pass along a GoFundMe in order to help somebody to get it shared on social media? This is for a friend of mine who is trying to make a cartoon series and needs some funding to do it. I told him I would include the link to his GoFundMe in this video and asked to pass it along on social media if you can. Thank you. If you like this video, please let me know.